Well, howdy folks, I'm Kevin with Lifestyle Overland, and in today's video we're going to walk you through step by step how to disassemble this diesel heater. Oh, and by the way, if you're just here to learn more about diesel heaters, we've got a review video that we did a couple weeks ago. Head down to the description and jump over to that video to get our take on 1 year of experience with this thing, the problems that we had and what we did to fix it. For starters, you're going to want to make sure it's unplugged. We don't want any power inside this box. Now, this is something that we did when we first got this unit, just to try and get the exhaust fumes high because heat rises, right? That way it would move it further away from the intake for the heating side of this unit. This exhaust gets really hot sometimes, and so this is just a good safeguard, wrapping it with the heat tape to make sure it doesn't light your combustible materials on fire. I just use a self-tapping screw in one of the factory holes here. Just make sure there's nothing on the back side so you don't dive into your wiring accidentally. All right, for the fresh air intake for the combustion side, we also routed this up with a one-hole strap just to keep this out of harm's way when we're traveling and stuff. Also didn't want to suck up any water if it did rain and flood the area around it. This is just the other side of the strap. Again, this is just where we used another self-tapper, making sure there's nothing behind here to attach this so we didn't screw into any hoses or cabling. And just to make this easier, I'm gonna go ahead and take our wiring harness off. If you haven't done it already, I recommend taking a Ziploc bag or something plastic, putting down underneath this cap and tightening it all up. That way we don't end up with fuel leaking out of this cap while we have it laid on its side. That's going to be the next step. All right, let's lay this thing over gently. Hopefully she doesn't leak on us. Like so. All right, well, you can see after over a year of use and this thing getting exceptionally hot due to carbon buildup, we had a couple of issues where the heat exchanger was completely packed. And so this got extra hot once that heat was not able to dissipate itself to the heat exchanger. And that heated this up, and also with just the vibrations and road wear of this sitting inside of a storage container wore this down. So we're going to need to replace this before we're done. All right, now we want to loosen the clamps for our exhaust. And yeah, that has seen better days. Time for fresh wrap. So if you're like me and you can't get to the other screw head with the cover on, we'll get to that in a second. So stand this back up. All right, now we're going to take all the cover screws apart. So we have several on this side, the top, and also on the opposite side here. We can speed this process up. Take this guy off. And the cover should slide right off like that. Let's go ahead and put the cap back on. All right, now we're gonna remove the diesel tank, like so. You should have plenty of slack in your fuel line, so it shouldn't be too much of a headache. And then we're just gonna take this guy loose here. Now, ideally, you would have drained your tank, but we've got so little in there, we're just going to stand it up for the step, and then just slip that line out of the hose like that. And then we'll set our diesel tank in the floor on its side. So in our previous video, when we were walking through our review of this unit, we highly encouraged everyone to disassemble this completely when they first get it out of the box. Well, not completely, but to this point, so you can at least inspect the electrical connections. When we got ours, we actually had a loose ground right here, and it caused an undervoltage error, which shut this thing down in the middle of the night and I had to go freeze my backside off until we could figure out what was going on. And while you're in here, you want to take a look at all of your cabling. Make sure it's not up against sharp edges like this guy right here. Especially if you're going to be riding this thing down a trail in a trailer or something that's going to shake it to pieces. So just inspect all these little pinch points, all these areas where things could potentially get cut. That includes your fuel line as well. This is also a good time to check on your fuel pump, make sure that it's centered within the rubber bushing. This is what keeps it from getting too doggone loud. You're still going to get some click out of it, but if this thing's up against the chassis, it'll drive you crazy. So this cable here is your connection for your controller. If you want to lengthen this so that your thermostatically controlled option is all the way up in your vehicle or your tent, this is what you would actually cut into and splice. This is a 3-wire setup, so you'll just have to get a 3-wire length of cable to make this a little bit longer. It's also a good chance to point out that if you ever have a problem with your fuel pump itself not running, take a look at this connector right here. This is where you'll disconnect it from the pump, shake it around a bit, check the connections like that, and just make sure that these terminals are nice and happy little terminals. And then it goes right back together like that. All right, on to the heat exchanger. So the way this thing is mounted into this very fragile container is by its manifold down here. Thankfully, we've got all of our diesel tank stuff removed so we can flip this over without worry. And now we have better access to this screw that was going to give us a problem. All right, now we have our exhaust and our intake loose, we're going to take our fuel line apart. All right, so this is where it starts getting a little more interesting. We've got 4 nuts that hold this manifold in place. There's this flimsy bracket that it passes through. Now, the first time I disassembled this, 2 of the studs pulled out, 2 of the studs stayed in. Either way, as long as you don't strip those holes out, you should be just fine, but I'm not holding my breath on this. It's been several times it's been taken apart, and it's not the greatest metal. So whatever you do, be very careful, be very ginger when you're taking it apart and putting it back together. I wouldn't recommend using power tools on this step. So in case you're wondering, these are 10mm nuts, and you're gonna want a deep well socket for this. So let's see how lucky we get. So you can see in this case, the whole doggone stud just pulled out with it. Over here on the exhaust side, we get a nut. Intake side, another stud. You're going to want to hold on to your heat exchanger now. Take the pressure off on this last one. And there you have it, another nut. All right, before I pull this completely out, I want to point out one of the weaknesses, I think, in this design. This is the fresh air intake. This is what's going to eventually blow up into your sleeping area, your tent, whatever it is that you're trying to heat. It's within the confines of this box. So if you spill any diesel fuel, if there are any residual fumes within this enclosure, they're getting sucked into here. I really wish this extended out this direction, but I've got some ideas to fix this later on down the road. All right, now we're just gonna pull the heat exchanger up and out of its bracket. And depending on how flimsy your bracket is, it might take some finesse. Now remember, there's a wiring harness tied to this thing, so don't go running off with it just yet. I'll lay that down here. So this is a really flimsy piece of sheet metal. If you have problems getting this thing out, if this is too tight for you, I've got a screw that goes right here and it's actually rattled out, so I have a little bit of flexibility on this side. All right, now I'm just going to disconnect this clip here. Pushing down on this white tab and disconnect the harness just like so. And now this chassis can set to the side. All right, there's our heat exchanger, all free. All right, now that we got a little more access to this clamp, we'll take this guy loose, slide it off of the fuel line. Now pay attention to the direction that this gasket is facing. So your lip goes up. And this is not one that you want to rip either. So just take some care, don't get in a hurry. Just gently peel this thing up and over your ports. And you can see the heat's already starting to really degrade this guy. So I don't know how much longer this thing's got. You can also see some exhaust that's been leaking around it here too. Have to keep an eye on that. I'm just going to unscrew our intake guard like so. And that'll allow us to take the cap off of our heat exchanger, just like that. And now we get to the guts of the matter. Now we're going to slide our wiring harness protector up and out of its slot, like so. Tilt it up in its housing, slide it right out. And there we go. All right, well, if you've never seen a heat exchanger or you weren't understanding what I meant in the last video, here we are. So basically the way this works is there's an igniter, much like a spark plug or a glow plug right here inside this contained combustion chamber. So basically the diesel fuel is being pumped in there, ignited, and there's this constant fire, this constant combustion that's taking place, and it heats up this unit. And all of these fins dissipate that heat into the outer chamber where this fan blows across and pumps your nice toasty warm air up into your sleeping area or whatever it is you're trying to heat. So very, very cool design. Very simple design, honestly. And if you're intimidated at this point, don't worry. We're gonna stick with you on this one. It's not that bad. So we're gonna start by taking this screw out where the circuit board lives. And then we're just gonna pinch these little teeth together here, and that guy slides right up like that. And that's your circuit board. Just don't pull on this. Now, just for ease of maintenance, we're gonna take these terminals off of here just to get this out of harm's way. So this is the power for the fan right here. Just press down, being gentle, kind of wiggle this side to side. All right, like that. And then this is our igniter circuit. Right, like that. And then this little set of blue wires going back here is actually our temperature sensor. So this is what tells the system there's a problem if it's been trying to burn for a while and doesn't detect heat. All right, like that. And there's your control circuit. Now, while the odds are slim that you're gonna have to remove this heat sensor, I'm gonna show you how to take it out of the way anyhow, just so you don't end up accidentally breaking it. Just press down on this little rod, pull it out of its holder, just like that. And that just holds in place on the exterior of this to tell it, yep, hey, we got heat. Keep giving me fuel. We'll set that to the side. All right, next step is we're gonna take the top part of the exchanger off, and this is a 4mm Allen head screw. So there's 4 of these guys. Again, not the highest quality steel that we're working with here, so I recommend that you do this by hand just so you don't accidentally strip these out. If you strip this out, you're pretty much toast. You're not gonna get the same amount of seal on this connection, and you might start sucking a lot of fumes up into your sleeping area. I like to go around and just give each one of them a little bit of a spin just to loosen it all out evenly. Again, just imagining this is fragile material. All right, the magic of editing, we're gonna speed this process up. You get the picture. All right, now I'll just separate it right like that. And there's your igniter chamber. Now, just keep in mind, there is a seal here. very fragile. So just be mindful that you don't rip it or tear it. You want to maintain the integrity of these seals as much as possible. Okay, now this is what we're working with in here. Now right here, this is your igniter. This is the best way to get to it to loosen it. So what we're going to do first is just slide this boot up onto this wiring harness. Then we'll reach in here with an open-ended wrench and get this guy loose. Doesn't need much, just want to clear it so that we can spin this around right here. Now using 12mm, we're going to loosen this igniter. And I'm sorry if my hands are in the way, you get the idea. Right, like so. And now we can just spin this guy. And now it's free. Good time to inspect this thing. I mean, this is pristine. This still looks good. Now, if you're getting errors and there's no carbon buildup, it's likely this thing is fouled out. So even though it looks good, it's possible that it could just be out. So not a bad thing to carry in your spare parts kit. All right, we're almost there. Now we've got 4 of these Allen head bolts. Need to take that loose and then slide this out of the way, and then we'll be into the chamber. Now sometimes the problem is, because this is a heated area, these can get pretty tight, and it's really difficult to get your Allen wrench down inside here. So a little trick that you can do is put this in here and then use a small closed-end wrench to just leverage it out. Right, like that. All right, so now we're going to slide this out, but making sure that this gasket comes with the fuel line as well. And let's see what we ended up with. It's been a while since I've checked this guy. Whoo-wee. That's what you want to see. That's pretty doggone clean down in there. I'll take that all day long. Very nice. Now I'll point out one more time, here's another gasket that you're going to want to be mindful of. Don't lose this. You definitely want to make sure this stays intact, stays in place. But at this point of the game, if you were to get in here and find that you were packed full of carbon, you'd pull that out of the way and then just begin the scraping process. Getting in all these grooves, knocking it all loose. And just clean that up as much as you possibly can. Shake it out, spend some time on it, get it nice and clean. Now, another thing that you can do that is rumored to help is before you shut this thing down, run it on high for about 5 or 10 minutes. So let's say you get out of the tent in the morning, just ramp this thing up, and that'll help burn off some of the excess, so they say. All right, well that's disassembly. Maybe it wasn't as bad as you expected. It's not a terrible evolution. It's not super complicated. Once you do it a couple times, you can almost do it in your sleep. But I am going to do a reassembly part of this video, but it's going to be pretty snappy. So I'll call out all the steps. That way you can follow the reassembly process. We got you back. All right, let's pretend you got it all cleaned out. First step is to make sure that you put this gasket back in the right orientation. So, right like that. And let's just take a look inside this guy too. Looks like there's a little bit, just a little plug or two of carbon buildup. I don't know if you can see that right up in the very, very end. Just gonna knock that loose. That's actually a decent little chunk right there. So this is where all the ignition takes place right here. Your fuel gets dripped in up top there. This is where the igniter lives. As the fuel drips in, it just, and then these little fins around here is where your fresh air goes in to feed the fire. Now we're going to lay our igniter assembly back inside the unit here. And just keep an eye on your little guide here. It's going to lay right in there. Just remember to use the short screws. These are the short screws. These are the long screws. These go in the next step, so don't get these mixed up. And just remember, we're working with A1 Chinese grade pot metal, so I'm going to be gentle here. Don't tighten it down until you get all the bolts in. Now that's pretty snug, but I am just going to give it just maybe 1/10 of a turn using my little hack here. Maybe not even that. That's already pretty tight. Just gentle pressure. Yeah, that's pretty tight already. And that one moved a little. I just want to make sure that we got that nice and sealed. We don't want fumes escaping. Okay, that's good. All right, now we're going to reinstall our igniter. And again, let me just give you a little close-up of this guy real quick. This way you kind of know what a good igniter looks like. Now if this was all crusted up and covered in carbon, then you're probably running it a little too rich. Then you're probably not running it at the proper pump settings. So there you go. All right, going to ease this down into its hole. I'll show you what I'm doing over here too. Right down in there. We don't want to spin this wiring harness. We're just using it to help things get kind of started. So don't go cranking on this too much. Just some wiggles to get it going. And then use the 12mm to tighten it the rest of the way down. And not too terribly tight. You can see I'm just snugging that in. That looks good. And now let's just tuck our little boot back into place here. So that lower lip here is what goes inside and holds this in place. Right, like so. Okay, next step. All right, now for our blower assembly, but don't forget, we've got another gasket that goes in here. So just gonna match up the ears, lay it in place, and then match this guy up. Manifold goes towards the other manifold, lays right into its little holder here. And now we use the long screws. Just make sure that you've got your lock washers on there too. Keep these things from dancing apart on the trail. Snug these guys down without getting too carried away, breaking things, stripping things, destroying the entire unit. Now you could probably, in a worst case scenario, if you did accidentally strip one of these out, maybe give some JB Weld a try. Pour down in there, put it in your threads, but that might be the last time you get it apart. But it might, help you finish your trip. The main thing though is you just don't want any fumes getting into your fresh air. That's what we're after here. Okay. All right. Remember this little guy? I'm just gonna lay right in his little holder here. Get a little spring clip and hook him into his hole there. Right like so. And then into there. And that holds him right in place. On to the electronic panel. So the nice part is you can't get this wrong. You got 4 prongs, 3 prongs, 2 prongs, so you're not going to get them crossed up. All right. That guy goes there. 3 goes on there. 4 goes on there. All right, like so. And now's a good time to take a look at this again. Just remember that your wiring harness is going to go out this side over here. So it'll be pointed this way. So you just want to feed all of your wires in a way that's not going to get pinched. And that just fits into its slot there, pushes down. And then it's the only Phillips machine screw, so there's no tip in everything you've disassembled. So if you're trying to figure out which screw it is, this is the one. All right, like so. All right, now we're just gonna double check everything. It all looks good. So just remember, this end goes towards the enclosed area. It lays into place just like that. I'm just gonna keep a check on your cables. Make sure nothing's in a bind, nothing's gonna get pinched. And then go ahead and feed this guy right into its slot. And you can see there's been some wear and tear on this harness right here, probably just from the vibrations. As a matter of fact, I can see copper right through there. So that's a problem that was about to happen. So let's pause real quick and tape that guy up. Now this is a brand new unit for you. This might be a good one to throw some extra protection on before you head off into the wilderness, because this is what a year of use looks like, and looks like it needed some help. Now this is just some wire loom tape. Just gonna throw it on here for a little added abrasion protection. There, maybe that'll prevent another cold night of disappointment. Now our cap is just going to mesh here at the top, and then watching our cables, I'm going to pull this guy down. All right, like so. And then our end cap goes right on like that. Almost there. Now for the rattle trap reinstall. So here's another complaint that I have. I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if I can get that dialed. You can see this is just really flimsy, cheap metal, and it is warped all to heck just from assembly, reassembly. I really wish that this was a little stouter piece, but like I said, this will probably be the last time it goes back into this enclosure. I'm thinking about building out a custom box to move all the internal components to, but for now, it's what we got. All right, remember our wiring harness here, so just gonna hook that guy back up, right like so. Really give it a good press, make sure it gets in there. And now, we're gonna lay this guy back in. Just remember this end goes towards the graded end. The open end sticks outside. And watch your fuel lines. Don't let your wiring harness crush those. Now, while in this position, I'm just gonna turn this, kick this guy out for a second. And you remember this little troublesome guy. We wanna go ahead and probably put that on now. All right, so I almost forgot a step myself, and that is the gasket. So as you can see, we've got our fuel line hole here. That's gonna be your guide. So it's gonna go just like this with your lip facing up. Not that it really stinking matters with all the warpage in our mounting surface, but we'll try. We'll see if we can't get it all back together the way it's supposed to go. Right, like so. And then our little fuel line that's a pain to get to. I want to get that on first. Tighten him up. And this is not a super high pressure system, so don't feel like you got to crank down on it like you would a high pressure fuel line. We don't want to break our clamp. And this will still pivot. So we'll pivot it out of the way for now. Lay this into its resting spot. Now we're ready to hook it up. Now we're gonna pin the tail on the donkey here. We got our stripped out stud that we're gonna fish back in here. And as you can tell, there's just not a lot of meat this is all sitting on. If you've got the time and inclination, you might beef up that mounting point there. Now, like I've said all along, I want to be very gentle with tightening these down. I've got one that's just about ready to give up. See right there, it slipped. Yep. I think this one's gone too. And that one just went as well. Oh, come on, guys. Really? Really? Yeah, so basically this is just holding it in place. Thankfully, this is not sealing off exhaust fumes or intake. This is purely a mounting surface. So, unfortunately, this one's toast. So I may have to order a whole new unit if I want to properly mount it into another enclosure. Not the greatest quality. Not at all. Anyhow, let's go ahead and get our fresh air put back on. Now, just to be clear, this is fresh air for the combustion stage, not for the air you get heated with. Now, do yourself a favor and make sure you turn these clamps where you can get to them later. Now, this is the step where I'd probably go ahead and put this exhaust back in place, but you can see we got to do some maintenance on it. So let's just imagine that that's what you did now. You want to make sure this line doesn't get anywhere near this exhaust port right here. And you want to get about a 1/2 inch of this up in there. So I can kind of see where mine's been, but if it's a fresh hose, make you a mark there or hold your finger on it just to make sure you get enough fuel line up inside. And then tighten that puppy down. In case you're wondering, this is a 7mm. So I'm going to go ahead and pivot this guy around. Trying to keep as much metal or anything tied to this fuel system away from this hot area right here. All right, now we're ready for our cover. All right. Now, we're just going to throw our fuel tank right back in here. Slide this guy on first. Again, make sure you get that in there far enough. That's what she said. Tighten him up. And then you just want to make sure you're not going to be pinching your control cable here. So kind of pay attention to how this lays in. Stay clear of that guy. Get your fuel line wrapped in a way that's not kinked. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, but that should work right there. Lid back off. And cover. Lid, just so we don't throw dirt down in there again. And I think you can see what happens next. Now, I already mentioned this is not the most sturdy enclosure, so tighten these by hand and be very ginger with them because most of them are stripped already. There's a little better picture of what I did with this rubber one-hole strap. And just as a heads up, if you do strip some of these out, you can always go with a larger screw. You can go with a self-tapping screw, something like this. Just make sure you get them short. Make sure you don't shoot them into your fuel line or your wiring. All right. Now we'll just hook up our power cables back here. I wrapped mine in split loom just for a little added protection around camp in case you trip over it. If you ever get a low voltage alarm for this thing, this is the first place to check. Just make sure these didn't rattle loose on you.